Namaskar, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to a series of webinar conversations on the travel of Indic knowledge systems from India to the different parts of the world. Travel of India's from one part of the world to the other has been happening before, during, and later to the ancient world civilizations, continuing to the medieval and modern periods of world history, including the current times. Travel of knowledge systems, art, and culture is part of this, and studying this travel is fascinating. Comparative studies of various aspects, such as knowledge systems, art forms, and cultures of world societies, will form a foundation for the basis of a hunch regarding travel. In some cases, the basis of the similarities in these aspects may be confirmed with evidence to be due to travel, and in some cases, it may end up just as a hunch without clear proof of diffusion. India has been identified as one of the significant contributors of various knowledge systems, forms of art, and aspects of culture to the world. More study from comparative and diffusion perspectives is required to bring to light to unexplored aspects of similarities of Indic knowledge systems, art, and culture with their counterparts in different parts of the world, and to investigate into the questions of whether the similarities are coincidental or proof of travel of these aspects from India to different parts of the world. We would like to now present a short snippet from Professor Nagaraj Paturi's talk on the future scope of IKS studies. Srinivasji, can you please play that?
When you do comparative knowledge study, there are already established tools of methodology that are already established in a discipline called cultural anthropology. Inside cultural anthropology, what they do is they do comparative cultural study. Actually, anthropology is all about comparative cultural studies only. It is a comparative discipline. Basically, social or cultural anthropology is like linguistics. Actually, linguistics also starts from comparative language studies. And then there are universalizations and generalizations about the phenomenon of language itself. So in comparative cultural anthropology and social anthropology also, there are universalizations of human being. That is why it is anthropos and anthropology. So universalizing descriptions or conclusions about human culture or human society happen from the comparative study of cultures and comparative study of society. So because they are already doing that, they have already faced this issue of travel, of culture from place to place. And in that discipline, there are words like monogenesis and polygenesis. Monogenesis is the idea where the believer in that model believes that all ideas, all cultural features have origin in only one place. From there, they have all spread to different places. Theories like Sanskrit is the origin of all languages, or Hebrew is the origin of all languages, or Classical Arabic is the origin of all languages, or whatever, such theories, they are theories of monogenesis. And there are many such for culture also. There are theories which propose that everything in the world has come from one single place and spread to the other parts of the world. In India, there are some naive believers who believe that, all knowledge in the world has come from the Vedas. All sciences have come from the Vedas, or all knowledge in the world has come from the Vedas. And all that. So, and that such theories have been mocked at also. This is an example of a monogenesis theory. But the counter to this, the other side of this is called polygenesis theories, where people believe that there can be, for example, multiple language family theories in linguistics. They belong to this category of polygenesis. You have multiple language families, each of them having a proto-language, and from that, multiple languages of the world can be traced historically through a certain method of reconstruction of the proto-language. So that actually that kind of model. That model belongs to the theories of polygenesis. So for knowledge also, we have to actually compare these theories of monogenesis theories and polygenesis theories. Another tool that it is used in cultural anthropology is that of diffusion and unity of mind. Diffusion is the theory that the culture or cultural element travel from one part of the world to the other. For example, folk tales, fairy tales, proverbs, riddles. When through comparative study they find that there is a folk tale which is exactly similar to the other. There is actually a whole book called Tale Type Index, and they have classified tale types. And for each tale type, you have examples from all over the world. The same tale type is found. So, which is emerging actually, this tale type index is itself is emerging from a comparative study. And from tale type index emerged another book called Motif Index from the tales. And here, the researchers do not tell you that if a tale is found, tale type is found across the world in different parts of the world, it does not actually mean that they have traveled. It only means that similarities have been found in the tales of different parts of the world. And motifs also, how motifs can be found in different parts of the world. But there is a model within cultural anthropology and social anthropology called historical geographical method, which actually believes in diffusion. That folk tales or fairy tales or legends or myths or proverbs or riddles, all such cultural elements, each of them probably travel from one part of the world to the other, and they gather evidences for this, and they talk in terms of diffusion of ideas.
This video by Dr. Nagaraj Paturi is available on YouTube. You can have a look. We will now move on to the session. So the first of these conversations is going to focus on the travel of Ayurveda, India's ancient knowledge and practice system of wellness to different parts of the world. Today we have with us Dr. Ramkumar and Dr. Marc Halpern. I will introduce the speakers and then hand the session over to them. Dr. Ramkumar is a student of Ayurveda and other traditional Indian knowledge systems. Over the last 2 decades, he has given talks and conducted workshops in the Americas, Africa, Europe, Australia, and many parts of Asia, promoting health, happiness, and contentment. Dr. Ramkumar is a founder director of Punarnava Ayurveda, an institution committed to authentic Ayurveda for universal well-being. Punarnava Ayurveda is currently engaged in the creation of Vaidyagrama, an experimental green self-sustaining authentic Ayurveda healing community on the outskirts of Coimbatore in South India. He's also a director of the Ayurvedic Pharmacy group of institutions based in Coimbatore in South India. Dr. Marc Halpern is one of the pioneers of Ayurveda in the West and is considered to be a preeminent practitioner and teacher of Ayurveda in the United States. He is one of the few Westerners ever recognized in both the United States and in India as an authority on the subject of Ayurveda medicine and was awarded the All India Award for Best Ayurvedic Physician. A warm welcome to our speakers. With that, I hand the session over to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those that introduction, and wonderful to share time with you, Dr. Ramkumar, as well. It's a joy to be here, and wonderful to talk about how Ayurveda has really traveled around the world. Vedic knowledge has traveled around the world, and I'm eager to tell my story. I'm wondering, Dr. Ramkumar, if you'd like to begin, if you'd like to share a little bit. You've been traveling all around the world, planting seeds of Ayurveda. And is there anything that you'd like to share?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, my own journey into the knowledge of Ayurveda really began as part of a journey both to heal myself and also a professional journey as a doctor to try and understand the best way to help my patients. started out as a chiropractor, and a chiropractor manipulates the spine in order to try to remove what chiropractors feel is the cause of disease, the cause of suffering, which is the misalignments of the spine that interfere with the functioning of the nervous system and the connection of the brain to the body. While I was studying that system, I was introduced to some interesting philosophies. One of them in chiropractic was the idea that disease began when man, the physical, separated from man, the spiritual. And from that disunification, suffering took place, and that healing would take place when man, the physical, reunited with man, the spiritual. For a long time, I didn't understand what that meant. I just kept on studying, and I kept on practicing chiropractic. I became very, very ill, fortunately, in 1987. I suffered from a severe disease that left me bedridden, and I had arthritis through my entire body. My liver wasn't functioning properly. My spleen was enlarged. My red blood cells were breaking down. And I had a situation that deeply affected almost every function of my body. Even my brain was affected. My heart was affected. I didn't sleep for nearly 7 years, hardly, just little bits of time. And my heart became very irregular. We now know today that I was suffering from a condition called Lyme disease, which is a tick-borne illness where the tick causes an infection inside the body that can affect every system of the body. I went on a journey to heal myself, and Western medicine didn't have much to offer me. So in my journey to heal myself, this led me actually into the study of Ayurveda and the study of yoga. That was just a part of it. And I'll talk more about how I needed to go down that road. But the other part of it was I suffered from severe back pain. And the severe back pain also sidelined me. It kept me sometimes in bed, herniated discs and so forth. The combination of this led me to study both Ayurveda and yoga. And now I just want to go back a little bit before myself, if you will, before this moment when I began to seek out teachers in Ayurveda and yoga and how I found out about that. Really, if we want to look at how it is that Ayurveda and really yoga, both, because, you know, they're intricately connected. Yoga arrived on the shores of the United States in the 1890s with Swami Vivekananda. And you can't really bring yoga to the world without also bringing some knowledge of Ayurveda. The conversation is going to take place, and the seeds began to be planted as early as the late 1800s. In the 1920s, it was Paramahamsa Yogananda who was really brilliant in bringing the knowledge of yoga to the West. And that continued on as a tradition of Indian teachers like Dr. Ramkumar, who's traveling around the world today in our modern times, sharing that knowledge and wisdom. That has taken place for really probably thousands of years of teachers who have spread around the world carrying this knowledge. It's a brilliant knowledge. It's an important knowledge. It's essential knowledge for humanity. It really began to take off, though, in the United States in the 1960s with the teachings of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And those teachings took off worldwide because he became such a personality around the world, and the organization became such a personality around the world. The Transcendental Meditation movement took off as well. And suddenly people all around the world were meditating, were being introduced to yoga, introduced to kirtan, and you had a tremendous worldwide cultural blossoming of the yogic Ayurvedic knowledge. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought over teachers, specifically in Ayurveda, to be a part of their organization. And within their organization, began to do education and began to inspire people to be well, to be happy, to be healthy. The knowledge continued right around that same time in the 1960s and 70s with Swami Vishnudevananda, who came over, a disciple of Swami Shivananda. And Swami Vishnudevananda also brought over teachers, developed ashrams here in the United States and all around the world. The Shivananda Yoga Vedanta centers are very, very well developed worldwide. And Swami Vishnudevananda had a vision too of bringing together Ayurveda and yoga. Swami Shivananda had written a book in English on Ayurveda. And so this knowledge continued to develop, become a little bit more people began to become a little bit more aware. Still, it was mostly inside of the circle of yoga and the yoga ashrams and the yoga groups, like the Transcendental Meditation Movement, the Maharishi's group, the Shivananda community, and other communities that were focused on yoga but had a little bit of knowledge of Ayurveda. In the 1980s, you also had Dr. Vasant Lad come over to the United States, brought over by some teachers, some students of his that met him in India, and brought him over in the late 70s and through the 80s. And he began to also do public health talks, much like Dr. Ramkumar is doing today worldwide, inspiring new groups and new cultures and new individuals to this knowledge. Its focus was on the knowledge of Ayurveda, first and foremost, and secondly, from that, Vedic studies as well. So many of his students began to get involved in the broader studies of the Vedas, Jyotish as an example, and were introduced to more Hindu practices in that way. Around the same time, too, in the 1980s, Dr. David Frawley became very preeminent in the United States and began really to become an important teacher of Ayurveda here in the United States. His teacher, Dr. Vastra, had passed in the 90s. This is where he learned Ayurveda from. And then he began to also teach, sometimes with Dr. Ladin, often in his own organization called the American Institute of Vedic Studies. And he began to develop courses and home study courses and ways for people to interact and gain a deeper knowledge of Ayurveda. Dr. Frawley's depth of knowledge in the Vedic studies is really quite remarkable. And he stands, next to any teacher in the world today in terms of his knowledge of Vedic studies. So his organization went quite deep into the knowledge of Ayurveda, the knowledge of yoga, the knowledge of Jyotish, and continued to propagate this knowledge in the 1980s, late 80s and 90s. Now, coming back to my story, when I was quite ill and needed to go on a journey to heal myself, I began to interact with yoga in ways that I didn't fully understand and didn't fully expect. This was in the late 1980s. I was introduced first to the practice of Yoga Nidra by a student of Swami Satchitananda, who's from the Shivananda lineage. And I was introduced to Yoga Nidra as a way to both relax my body, support the healing of my body, and rest my body. Remember, I mentioned that I wasn't sleeping. I wound up practicing Yoga Nidra for at least 3 hours every day, which gave my body the deep rest that it needed. Sometimes I spent all night in the state of Yoga Nidra because my body would actually not go into a sleep state, but it would go into a yogic sleep, Yoga Nidra, which is really quite a remarkable technique. It really influenced the progressive relaxation movement of the 1960s and the 1970s. I interacted with it in the 1980s as Yoga Nidra. And so it became a foundational part of my healing journey to practice this. It's a technique that I still practice today, Yoga Nidra, on almost a daily basis. It's just a way of resetting the physiology of the body and also of the mind and opening up the door to higher consciousness. So it's really a beautiful practice. As I began to heal, I also was practicing chiropractic, and I was pondering the cause of disease, the cause of suffering. And I came to the realization that disease is deeper in the human being than just the nervous system. It's deeper in the human being than the misalignments of the spine that I've been trained to correct in chiropractic. My purpose in life has always been to understand the cause of suffering and to remove the cause of suffering. And this is what I was really interested in. So I made a difficult decision to let go of my practice in chiropractic and to explore other systems of healing. I did a postgraduate program in holistic medicine that studied Chinese medicine, herbalism, homeopathy, and something I'd never heard of before, Ayurveda. This was now in the early 1990s. When I heard of Ayurveda, it was as if everything I'd ever known came back to me, and Ayurveda gave me the language to understand what I already knew to be true in my heart. And that took me deeper, and that's when I pursued further studies with Dr. David Frawley, who then introduced me to Dr. Subhash Ranade. And in 1995, we opened up the first college of Ayurvedic medicine here in the United States. And that college really began with the vision of trying to build a profession for Ayurveda here in the West. It was the first college of Ayurvedic medicine, the first group to really take on the responsibility for the professional study of Ayurvedic medicine, for training people to graduate and go into private practice as practitioners of Ayurveda. So together with my teachers, we took this knowledge really that had been blossoming. We took it to the next level. We received state approval to operate a college for the first time outside of India. And we've been developing Ayurvedic education here in the West ever since. And without the pioneering efforts of all these individuals who brought it to the United States, we couldn't have done what we've done here to do our part in trying to promote this remarkable knowledge that truly brings to humanity the potential for optimal health and peace of mind. In fact, that is the most beautiful gift that for me has come out of India. It is an incredible body of knowledge, body of wisdom for living harmoniously in this world with every facet of nature. And only Ayurveda, as a science of medicine, has that knowledge. And it's a unique knowledge, and it takes a unique place in the full spectrum of healing systems in the world. I don't believe that there is another system of medicine that so beautifully articulates the path to wellness and the path to healing. So I will forever be in the debt of my teachers and those who brought this knowledge to the shores of the United States. And it's been my hope to be able to do my part to help cultivate the garden that they've planted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halpern, for taking us through the highways and byways of how Ayurveda made it across the world. And for Dr. Ramkumar, I just wanted to, if you could talk about how the Ministry of Ayush has signed almost 50 country-to-country memorandums of understanding in the recent past for research collaboration, establishing academic chairs of Ayush in foreign universities, setting up of Ayurveda, Ayush hospitals, academic institutes, herbal gardens, exchange of experts, workshops and conferences, many of which you are a part of, sir. So what led to this kind of all-out effort by the country's government to get recognition and serve the rest of the world with this education?
Namaste to everybody, and Markji, that is an incredible journey that you have shared. As you were speaking, you said that this knowledge already seemed familiar to me. And I was immediately reminded of a verse from our text, which said, Brahma smritva ayusho vedam. Brahma remembered Ayurveda. It was never said Brahma created Ayurveda or discovered Ayurveda or invented Ayurveda. He remembered Ayurveda. And that is also an indicator that this is a knowledge system, which is a knowledge of nature, and thereby exists in every one of us, which we have temporarily forgotten. And it takes some inspirational moments or some crisis moments for us to remember it and reconnect with it again. That was one thought that came to me as you were speaking. As I was listening to the video, the short clip that was played, I also remembered a line from the Mahabharata, which says, Yed iha asti tad anyatra yanne hasti na tat kvachit. What is here may exist elsewhere, and what is not here does not exist anywhere else. It's a very important line in the Mahabharata, which is also seen in the Ayurveda text. The knowledge that exists here in the Mahabharata, it means in the Mahabharata. In the Ayurveda text, it means in the Ayurveda text. So what exists here may be found elsewhere. But what does not exist here will not be found anywhere else. I think this is a very profound statement, a very almost an arrogant statement on the part of our teachers, our rishis, our saints, where they were very clear that this knowledge is a complete knowledge system. And they were also very clear that this knowledge cannot be attributed to any individual. It is eternal. It has no beginning. It has no end, because it is the knowledge of life and living. It's the knowledge of nature. And it has been documented to take care of the disease and distress as people start living together. Gramya Vasa Kritam Asukham is what Charaka says in the Charaka Samhita as the reason why many teachers got together for a conference in the Himalayas, probably the first medical conference. Agnivesha, Bhela, Jatukarna, Parashara, Harita, Ksharapani, many such teachers got together for a conference to document nature's wisdom for the community that is coming to live together, and knowing that 2 is company, but 3 is a crowd, which means that as people started coming together, there's going to be more and more disease and distress. So they anticipated it and recorded this knowledge. I think these are some very important points that we need to keep in mind when we talk about Ayurveda becoming global, because I think it has always been global. These have always been universal principles. Like the speaker in the video said, there is one school of thought that believes that all knowledge comes from the Vedas. I think many of us in the Ayurveda community subscribe to that school of thought, that all knowledge that is there comes from the Vedas, and the different medical knowledge systems across the world that are native, that are traditional to the different cultures, share a lot of commonality with Ayurveda. Whether it is the Chinese medicine, whether it is Native American medicine, the Aboriginal medicine in Australia, the Afrikaner medicine in Africa, the Campo medicine in Japan. There are so many different traditional medical knowledge systems which definitely share many practices and core principles with Ayurveda. Now, there can be debates about which is older and which is younger. I think those debates are not really critical. What is important is that it is probably only Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, that have documented principles in great detail compared to most other knowledge systems across the world. And that is why many a time these are considered to be the precursor of other knowledge systems. So, in recent times, the World Health Organization has given a definition for traditional medicine and calls it a sum total of knowledge, skills, and practices based on theories, beliefs, and experiences indigenous to different cultures, whether explicable or not, used in the maintenance of health as well as in the prevention, diagnosis, improvement, or treatment of physical and mental illness. I'm not sure whether the World Health Organization was doing a service to traditional systems or was stating something to the contrary, because nowhere is it talking about strong foundational principles and time-tested practices. It's only talking about theories and beliefs. But anyway, at least the World Health Organization recognizes traditional systems. The World Health Organization also gives a definition for health as, the definition of health evolved over a period of time, and its final definition rests at health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This definition came about sometime in the 1970s, which is around the time that Dr. Marc Halpern was telling us about the spread of Ayurveda and yoga in a much greater way across the world. Unfortunately, it still was not as comprehensive as the definition of health according to Ayurveda or according to Sushruta, specifically, where he talks about not just physical, mental, and social well-being. He also includes the spiritual and the environmental well-being. There are 5 elements to the definition of sukha or health or swastha. According to Sushruta, he says physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, spiritual well-being, and environmental well-being. A much more comprehensive definition. Hopefully, at some point, WHO will also adopt this definition. So I think it is in the last 5 years that the COVID phase, starting in 2020 and thereafter, everybody has suddenly got a jolt. The whole world has had a shock. There deliberations whether this was a created shock or whether it is actually for real. That's a different debate altogether. But post-COVID, everybody has been started to think about their health in a more conscious way. And in India too, the government of India having established a ministry for Ayush. I think we should also go into the history of the Ministry of Ayush a little bit, recognizing that for almost a couple of decades, there was only a department of Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy. Department of Ayush under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare that looked after the development and growth and spread of Ayurveda and other systems. It is only in the last 10 years that the Department of Ayush became a full-fledged independent Ministry of Ayush under the government of India. And I think for the first time, a formally trained Ayurveda Vaidya is the secretary of the Ministry of Ayush. So, which was a very welcome move. And so this Ministry of Ayush has been very proactive, both in the pre and post-COVID days, especially in the post-COVID days, or even starting from during COVID, where it put out many protocols based on Ayush principles and practices for the management of COVID. And these protocols were available on the website. It was widely propagated, and a lot of people use these protocols to great effect. Yes, there was a small dissenting group, maybe a large dissenting group, who thought that Ayurveda had no business treating COVID patients. But again, that's a different story. But consequent to that, or even prior to that, the Ministry of Ayush had declared the International Yoga Day, which I think is today being celebrated in many countries across the world, and had started tie-ups, formal collaborative tie-ups in, you said 50 countries, I thought it is 80 countries. Whatever be the number, there are very clear formal collaborative tie-ups, research tie-ups with universities across the world in many different countries, establishing chairs for Ayurveda in many different universities across the world, and putting a much greater effort into spreading not just Ayurveda as a empirical system, but Ayurveda as a evidence-backed system across the world. So that, I think, has been a focus of the Ministry of Ayush in the last several years. And we are seeing the benefit. I think there is a fast growing population across the world who are taking to all forms of traditional or complementary or alternative medicine, whatever you call it, especially to Ayurveda in the last several years. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. My next question is for Dr. Halpern. I think there was a paper presented or a series by UNESCO in 2018, Doctor. And one of the points that they make is that their paper was how ideas travel. And one of the points which they say about manuscripts was they travel more easily to cultures that are similar. So, but in the case of Ayurveda, given your own experience and Dr. Ramkumar's experience, I find that the attraction is more in cultures that have medical systems that are very dissimilar to ours. As you know, I think in Asia, we have similar modes of lifestyle, similar value systems, similar environmental conditions. Maybe we do follow in some ways similar practices. So how would you explain this cultural aspects of transmission of ideas?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. I actually agree with the statement that knowledge spreads more easily to similar cultures. And the reason now the United States and traditional India, certainly not similar cultures, very, very different in so many ways, from a medical perspective, from a spiritual perspective, very, very different countries. However, within the United States, there's tremendous diversity. And because there's tremendous diversity within the United States, there are individuals, and there have been forever here in the United States, that feel unfulfilled by the Western culture, the Western paradigm for how to see the world and how to see themselves and their relationship to the world. And that creates an opening. And so therefore, you have smaller groups that have developed within the United States that embrace cultures that are different from the United States. And those groups become the fertile ground that is similar to the culture of India. And so there becomes a similarity. And then the knowledge spreads into that smaller group. And over time, that knowledge leaks out from the smaller group, and the group becomes bigger and bigger and bigger that accept that body of knowledge. So I do believe that that statement you said was correct. I think this is how it has developed so beautifully here in the United States. It's continuing now as it spreads outside the core group, which becomes very devoted to the body of knowledge and its tradition. It starts to influence the entire culture. So the whole health and wellness movement in the United States is influenced by the knowledge of Ayurveda and the knowledge of yoga. Although today, many people who are involved in the health and wellness movement in the United States don't even necessarily realize that the origins of their thoughts, the origins of their knowledge lie in the knowledge of India. And so there is more of that, however, coming into awareness. And so a good example of that, I mentioned Yoga Nidra earlier. In the 1970s, when that knowledge became available, if you will, to Westerners many times renamed it. And they called it progressive relaxation and visualization. And there were popular books written on creative visualization and so forth. Then by the 1990s, people began to bring it back to its tradition and to the traditional stories of Yoga Nidra as a creation story, as a way of creating reality and your experience of reality. And people now call it Yoga Nidra. And Yoga Nidra is now a popular practice throughout the United States. But it wasn't up until really about 2015. That's when it really finally became an accepted practice and a part of the culture now in the United States. It's actually now you have Yoga Nidra rooms at Google and Facebook here in the United States where workers can go and practice. And so it takes a while for it to spread from the core group that finds the knowledge, and then it becomes part of the culture. And then, unfortunately, some people don't realize where it came from, but we always try to remember. We always try to recognize and honor that the origins. The origins are very important because it takes us to the broader knowledge that ties it together with body, mind, and consciousness.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Ramkumar, to just take this further, how important, since we do know that a lot of non-Indians value so much their personal experience at Vaidyagrama. So what is it, or what is the difference between them coming to this land and experiencing Ayurveda firsthand and learning Ayurveda outside India?
Well, I think we have to first acknowledge that while there has been tremendous growth in the awareness about Ayurveda globally, Ayurveda is still not recognized as a legally mandated medical system in most countries across the world. And I'm sure Dr. Mark will be able to shed more light on how legal it is in America to practice Ayurveda the way it is practiced in India. So, considering this limitation, in most countries, the practitioners or the doctors have limitations in the way they can give the Ayurveda experience to their clients or patients. To give a simple example, we do Panchakarma in India, where the patient gets admitted and the practitioner or the therapist gives the treatments to the patients. In the United States, I don't believe a Vasti can be legally given in most states in India. Am I right, Dr. Mark?
Well, at our Panchakarma Center here in the United States, we've been taking patients through the Panchakarma process in its entirety, and so we've been administering Bastis and Vamana and Virechana. So yes, we do these practices. There are some concerns about the administration of Basti and whether or not we're able to do that. We've had to change our methods over the years. So when we first began, we were using 20-inch catheters, and we were feeding it up into the colon, and we used a syringe for the solution to push the medicated oils and decoctions in. We came to recognize that eventually, as Ayurveda was becoming more common, as people were demanding it more, and the school was growing more, we had to be more cautious with that. We recognized that we were really, there was a gray area there, that we were probably crossing the line, and so we stopped with the longer catheters, and we began to use simple enema bags, which usually have a nozzle that's about maybe 3 inches long, which is not as effective to utilize those shorter nozzles. We would still do the insertions for a long period of time. Then there were individuals who wound up getting concerned about doing the insertions because the regulations here in the United States are pretty clear that you cannot invade an orifice of the body. And if you can't invade an orifice of the body, then what does that mean? What does that mean? And so it has never been determined in a court, or that administering an enema is not okay. So it's done all the time here in the United States. However, when it's possible and the patient is well enough, we have the patient do their own insertion. And so we then control the decoction that is being administered and the rate of flow. But the patient actually does the momentary physical insertion of the short nozzle as opposed to the long catheter that we used to use. And so it is different when we do it that way. And because of that too, we have to elevate the table in a way that will allow flow to move higher up into the colon in order to get similar effects. So we have had to make modifications to the practice of panchakarma here in the United States in order to keep it legal and to stay out of legal jeopardy. And it would be important, and it will happen. It'll be important as we go forward as a profession to clear these obstacles so that we're able to practice. And I don't see any reason why we can't achieve that actually in the United States. There are other groups aside from the medical profession that are able to do this. You have colonics as an example here in the United States, which can penetrate very deeply throughout the entire colon. So with the proper internal coordination here in the United States, it should be very possible to achieve those goals and be able to practice authentically these techniques. But Dr. Ramkumar is correct. There are limitations we have to be mindful of here in the United States, and it can even be different state to state here in the United States. That's the thing. We don't have one national law to follow. We have 50 state laws to follow. And in some states, you have much more flexibility in terms of what you do than in other states. There are states where you cannot touch a patient in theory. You could not even in theory take their pulse, although everybody does, and that's not really the intention of the law, but it's written in a way that some people interpret it, you can't even touch the patient. And then you have other states where you can completely advertise that you can treat cancer. And there's no problem with advertising that you can treat cancer with Ayurveda, or that you can treat heart disease, or that you can do a tremendous amount of what you can do in India. It's called health freedom states that have passed laws to allow for the safe and legal practice, which includes Ayurveda. It's not only Ayurveda, but alternatives to Western medicine. So we have a lot of variety here in the United States, and you have to know the local laws when you come to the United States. And at the college, we train our interns to practice in a manner consistent with the health freedom laws. And they are practicing in a manner that is safe, that is effective. And they are now practicing in all 50 states in the United States. And they have not been challenged for their right to practice, nor have they had any issues that have arisen with their practice. So we are seeing the growth of the profession.
Dr. Ramkumar, would you like to address Srimati Vijayalakshmi's question, which is, with our insistence on statistics, how can Ayurveda, that is very individual in its approach, navigate the situation? And this probably, if you could throw light on how is there a difference between the study of Ayurveda from the Indian point of view and the study of Ayurveda from a Western academic point of view?
I think first we have to understand that there are three parts to studying Ayurveda or any knowledge system. The first part is the tattva, or the core principles which never change. Like, for example, the Pancha Mahabhuta theory, or the theory of earth, water, fire, air, and space, which are universal and will always remain. The second part is called the Shastra, or the elaboration of the core principles based on the understanding by different teachers in their respective contexts. So we will find the same tattva described by Charaka in a particular way and experienced by Sushruta in a different way. And then we have what is called the Vyavahar, or the practical application, which is completely local and contextual. As long as there is a strong grounding in the foundational principles in the tattvas and a reasonable understanding of the Shastra, every practitioner can go out and innovate based on their local context. And that is what has helped Ayurveda work with many conditions that are apparently new to Western medical science, but Ayurveda is still able to address them because it puts them in the context of the core principles. Similarly, if you look at the number of herbs that were described in, say, the Rig Veda talked about 67 herbs, or the Atharva Veda talked about 293 herbs. Whereas today, we talk about more than 20,000 species in ethnomedicine of India that can be used in the management of different conditions. So that flexibility is what has helped Ayurveda survive the test of time. And that flexibility is what has enabled an Ayurveda doctor from India to go to Australia and document more than 50 Australian herbs on the principles of Ayurveda and use it in his practice in Australia. And so, the study and practice of Ayurveda, when it is contextualized, based whether it's in America or Europe or Australia or Far East, anywhere, I think that is the beauty. That is what has helped Ayurveda survive the test of time. Now, when we talk of statistics today, while we have never looked at evidence on the basis of numbers. In fact, the texts have a verse which says, Idam agama siddhatval pratyaksha phaladarshanat mantravat samprayoktavyam na mimamsyam kadachana. This knowledge is time tested. The teacher writes, this knowledge is time tested. We have seen its efficacy. So use it as a mantra, even if you are unable to comprehend it fully. That is the confidence with which the teachers have documented this knowledge. But in the modern context, numbers play a big role. We can certainly explore numbers because, there are so many different clinics across the world, in India, in Europe, in the US, who are documenting the results they achieve with patients pre and post. Now, if we can document that Ayurveda has worked with, say, 10,000 patients of COVID and, 9,000 recovered completely, 500 died, or 500 had to be shifted to Western medicine. That is a statistic which is significant. Now, how each of these 9,000 patients who recovered with Ayurveda were treated by the different Vaidyas, that is individual. So, Dr. Marc might have given one set of herbs, another doctor would give another set of herbs, but the result has been achieved. So even as a prima facie evidence, if these kind of numbers are generated, I don't see any harm in it. It is when we try to look at randomized, double-blind, controlled trials, which many in the Ayurveda community believe goes completely against the spirit of Ayurveda, while there is another group who are for those studies. That is when this whole idea of statistics or a statistically significant number becomes more challenging. But prima facie evidence, I think, it's good to generate it, because if the patient community is more confident when they hear that Ayurveda has treated X number of whatever cases, it will help them to, develop the confidence to go to an Ayurveda practitioner.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Mark, it is said that the rarest manuscripts are those that have the richest ideas. So you've been instrumental in creating textbooks, if I'm correct. And how does one combine new inputs, like Dr. Ramkumar said? We have new data, new knowledge now. How do we create an new academic texts while keeping the past intact?
Well, the textbooks that I've written really are taking the ancient knowledge and articulating it in a manner that matches the needs of this culture without changing the knowledge. In fact, the most recent textbook I wrote, called Classical Yoga Therapy, has more than 1,000 direct references back into the classical texts of yoga, from the Bhagavad Gita through the Shiva Samhita. And so I took 6 of those classical texts, the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Sutras, Garanta Samhita, Shiva Samhita, Garaksha Samhita, took these classical texts and integrate them together to then look at them and say, well, what is the body? How does that body of knowledge relate to healing? This was in yoga. And then directly referencing the various shlokas or sutras that I'm talking about in the textbook, so that there is a direct line back to that body of knowledge. It's not just a book for light reading, it's a textbook. The same thing is true with the Ayurvedic texts. Taking the 6 classical Ayurvedic texts, and there are more, of course, that you can draw from, but the Brihat and Laghu Treya, the Charaka, Vagbat, and so forth, taking these texts and then integrating them together and extracting from them the body of knowledge that is necessary, and reorganizing it in a way that matches the thought process of people in this culture, but still tying it back through references directly into those texts, so that the knowledge doesn't change, just the articulation of it changed, just as the classical texts were written at different time periods. Why do we have the Charaka Samhita, and why do we have the Ashtanga Hridayam and Samgraha? Why do we have those various texts? Because there was a time period between them that needed to be brought up to date for the culture, the language, the way in which people were experiencing life. So there are great similarities, but also differences in articulation. The same thing is true with the textbooks that I've been writing for those who are studying here in the United States. And that's how we stay true to it. Now, Ayurveda is a living body of knowledge, and there is a component that has to be addressed about modern knowledge of disease, because I believe, and I think everybody would, that the rishis who wrote these classical texts would use all the knowledge that they had in order to bring that knowledge to the people and to support the healing process. So we separate out in the articulation the aspects of knowledge that are what we could call modern. Because the thing about modern knowledge, as Dr. Ramkumar was mentioning, Ayurveda is based on a model of time. It is authentic because over time it has been proven to work, because it has been proven to be true. Modern knowledge is changing all the time and always has to be updated, because it's being tested, changed, altered, tested again, and changed and altered. It's a different way of understanding things. So we have, in the California College of Ayurveda, students are studying 2 things. They're studying the traditional body of knowledge of Ayurveda, and then they're also studying what is known today in the West about a particular condition. So they look at a condition, oh, I don't know, like anemia. They'll look at a condition like anemia from a classical perspective, and then what do we know about it today from the West? And then we have discussions in class about how do we bring that knowledge together. And that is a part of the education of the students.
Thank you, Doctor. If we may, we can look at some questions. Subhash Yadav is asking, are there possibilities that Ayurveda can evolve as a universal healing system which can be accepted all over the world? Just to tie this in with our theme of travel of ideas, so in soft power, we look at both quality as well as quantity. So in Ayurveda, are we looking at clearly quality? But is it possibility that we can also look at quantity in terms of how many people would be, like Dr. Mark said, how many people can we cover under Ayurveda?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that every human being on this planet needs to have the knowledge of Ayurveda in order to understand how to live harmoniously, to be well, and to reach their full potential as human beings. Quantity is important as well as quality. It's our vision for there to be as many Ayurvedic practitioners in the United States as there are for every other healthcare profession. If you look at chiropractors here in the United States, and I mention them because they're an alternative to Western medicine, you see them in every city, in every town. You have many of them in every city, many of them in every town. Same thing with acupuncturists, many of them. They're very successful. There is no reason why we cannot have as many practitioners of Ayurvedic medicine able to take care of the population. It is a process to develop the profession. So yes, that is the vision that I hold, that Ayurveda will become a mainstream alternative approach to well-being, and that people are going to seek it out because there really is no other system of medicine that so clearly articulates the path to wellness as Ayurveda does. It's just not.
If I could add to that, around I think it was around 20 years back that there was an organization called Voluntary Health Association of India, and they published a book on status of the practice of traditional medicine globally, or something to that effect. And in India, they said that, I don't remember the exact numbers, but these are approximations. But more than 70% of India was using Ayurveda or some form of traditional medicine. More than 80% deliveries in India were conducted by traditional birth attendants. More than 85% snake poison was treated by traditional healers. More than 90% of fractures in India were treated by traditional bone setters. And even in other countries like Belgium, France, even in the United States, 20 years back, the number was, if I remember right, somewhere between 40 to 45% of the people were using some form of traditional medicine. So, and these numbers have not changed on the, negatively. If at all, they have only grown positively in the last 20 years. So we may not be aware of the true numbers globally who are using not just Ayurveda, but some form of traditional medicine or native medicine. But these numbers are huge and they are growing. It can definitely become the preferred medical knowledge system if there are no other compulsions or interferences. If we look at it purely from a medical or a healing or a therapeutic standpoint, Ayurveda has the potential to become a universal system.
Doctor, one of the participants is asking why are they against Ayurveda principles? And one of the points which was pointed out by UNESCO in the travel of ideas is this issue of rejecting ideas, or dissent, or not acceptance of ideas. That is, when the ideas travel, why do communities reject certain ideas? So obviously there will be dissent, but is this dissent tied in only to Ayurveda specifically, or does it cover a more political spectrum where Ayurveda is associated with with Sanatana Dharma or with a certain value system?
If you look here in the West, you have, really in any part of the world, you have fixed ideas. People see the world the way they see the world. It is a reflection of their ego, really. It is what individuals take as truth, and they hold on to that, and they reinforce that through their experiences. According to what we believe inside of ourselves is what we experience on the outside of ourselves, which simply reinforces what we believe inside ourselves. So we become fixed in our ideas. Along comes a new idea. It doesn't matter what culture. It could be a new idea coming from the West into India, or a new idea coming from India into the West. It doesn't matter. It's now going to challenge the ideas that we hold to be true inside of ourselves. It requires a special individual. It requires an individual who is open-minded, has an open heart, and is able to consider all possibilities without attachment to a specific idea. And those individuals are rare at the beginning. And so eventually, as the ideas spread, people open up to them more. There's always a resistance to something new. Attachment is a great challenge on that challenges us, every one of us, physically, emotionally, and even spiritually. And so this really becomes the main challenge, I think, and where the resistance comes from. It's yes, if spiritual knowledge from India arrives in the United States, it's going to challenge the spiritual paradigm of the United States. If medical knowledge moves from India to the United States, it's going to challenge the orthodoxy of the United States. There's no way to avoid that. And the same occurs in the other direction as well. And the root of that is attachment. When we can break those attachments, we can see things more clearly, we can consider everything, and it really builds greater humility. Attachment builds arrogance. And so it's a journey to learn how to have that conversation and to communicate in ways that allow people to ease and let go of their attachments and to open up to the possibility of unification.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Ramkumar Vijayaka has a question. With the travel of ideas is also now in today's world, when it's possible, the travel of products and commodities. So in Ayurveda, we have herbs which necessarily have to be local. So how does how do we navigate this problem of having local herbs and yet being true to Ayurveda and yet adapting, like you had mentioned that it's possible? So how have these products traveled?
Before I address that, I was just thinking about this dissent question, and I was thinking that apart from the political, financial, and other compulsions, if we keep all that aside, which can be a strong reason for rejection and dissent, the modern mind is trained to seek knowledge very differently from the Vedic mind or the traditional mind. the modern mind is looking at, it's more external. The process is more external. It's about inductive reasoning, deductive logic, laboratory investigations. It's a completely different paradigm in which today knowledge is being understood. Whereas if you look at what our teachers have said about how they saw Ayurveda, and they actually say they saw the Vedas, they saw Ayurveda. They never said they created Ayurveda. That was from working on themselves. They worked with their own minds, did a lot of tapas, and cleansed the mind of the rajas and tamas, or the impurities of the mind, came into a sattva state, and there they saw the wisdom of nature. And that is again one reason why this wisdom is considered eternal. Now, that paradigm is very different from the paradigm in which all of us are growing up. So it's very difficult for the modern mind to relate to that paradigm unless there is an inspiration. There has to be some kind of motivation. And considering that, many global forces are actually against the modern mind understanding traditional wisdom, it's a much bigger challenge. But yes, the good part is it is certainly more, it's much better than it used to be 20, 30 years back. Regarding the second part of your question, it is also related to this, because unless the practitioner of today is able to work with oneself, work with one's own mind, to be able to see the wisdom in nature, to be able to see the wisdom in the local flora, it is very difficult to identify local herbs based on Ayurveda principles and apply them. So while there are practitioners who are doing that sporadically in many parts of India and across the world, generally it is easier to use known herbs, known flora, which can travel easily. All flora don't travel easily across the world, because today, especially, there is a red data list of plants, endangered plants, etc. So every plant cannot travel. But those that can travel easily are traveling to different countries in the world and are being used in the local context, which is not completely against the principles of Ayurveda. While Ayurveda recommends local and seasonal, there are always varying degrees. If we cannot always be local and seasonal, we go for the next option and then the next option. The intention is to give the best possible service to one who comes seeking help.
Doctor, in an interview with a yoga practitioner, she brought up this idea of divinity and visualizing, for instance, the Dashavataras in 10 parts of our body. So in India, knowledge is not fragmented, it is not compartmentalized. It pours over to all aspects of our knowledge systems. A person who knows and studies Ayurveda also studies yoga, also studies Sanskritam, also studies Vedanta. So there's no end to this search. So this is clearly very different from super specialization of all knowledge today, where we don't study beyond one subject. So how do we, study Ayurveda with a framework which in modern education systems is so specialized? I think both of you would be able to speak.
I can share what we do here at the California College of Ayurveda, and that's that the students' knowledge really has an integration of Ayurveda, yoga, and Vedanta. We don't separate those. So in other words, we are training the students to see the world differently, to see themselves differently and their relationship to the world differently. studying yoga, of course, and Ayurveda. They're also studying Samkhya philosophy. And so with these new philosophical systems, it's changing the eyes with which they see the world and opening themselves up to new ideas. You can't just study information. Information by itself is useless. It really has to move from the head to the heart. And for it to move from the head to the heart and to awaken the divine knowledge within the heart, you really have to be able to embrace the deeper wisdom of the Vedas. So it's all integrated together. Now, many of our students are also going to, because they're inspired, they're also going to spend time in ashrams. They're going to explore different ideas where they're going to get a broader body of a broader experience, if you will, of Vedic culture, participating in pujas and homas and so on and so forth. So they are getting introduced to the deeper and wider body of knowledge. But I agree. You can't just study information. It becomes wisdom, as Dr. Ramkumar was saying. It becomes wisdom really when you cultivate sattva, when you begin to live the principles of Ayurveda and you begin to live the principles of yoga. Then you have the realizations that occur. Knowledge occurs here, but realizations occur here. And if you're going to be able to take this wisdom beyond simply re-articulating a sutra or a shloka, and you want to embody it and be able to use it and be able to use it wisely, you have to awaken. You have to awaken the heart. And this is what our students are also focused on, is practice and living the principles, not just studying it.
Dr. Ramkumar, just to take, let us, address something that's very unpleasant or, not spoken about, but the commerce of ideas. Today, we want to patent everything. We want ownership of ideas, but which are not necessarily our own. And there was like, I read that, when we cook food, we're not supposed to sell food. For certain communities, selling of food or running of restaurants is not permitted because that's against our value system. So, but now, of course, everything is all about, even studying and education is about what we are going to earn in the future and how do we monetize this knowledge. So is there, something, how does one live with this in our conscience when we have to live in this world?
Well, I think there are multiple parts to this question. Firstly, you spoke about patenting or intellectual property rights. I think we have to be very clear that there is one word that was used called apaurusheya to describe all knowledge systems starting with the Vedas and emanating from the Vedas. Apaurusheya is not of human origin, which means all of this knowledge belongs to the community, belongs to nature, and none of us have a right to claim ownership of any of this wisdom. That is very clearly told in the text. The texts also tell us that ideally we should not be selling knowledge or healing. It is something to be shared freely with everybody. But that was also written in a socio-cultural context where the community took care of the teacher and the healer. And in that context, it was perfectly relevant. Even today, it would be great if such a context can be created, because the power of wisdom and the power of healing is fully available to us when there is a free exchange, when it is not in a transactional mode. Because the transactional mode, to some extent, takes away the sattva from this process. But the reality of the situation is today the teacher and the healer have to survive. So it is yes, it is a difficult situation, and I guess all that we can do is again remember the purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, and recognize that there is a place for ethical acquisition of artha, provided it is based on a platform of dharma. So from that perspective, I think monetization is fine, so that it takes care of the community and it allows a more widespread sharing of the wisdom and more widespread sharing of the healing practices, as long as it is based on a platform of dharma. That is why the Mahabharata is so important, because the Mahabharata is all about dharma. And if you look at the entire Mahabharata across all the parvas, you will see dharma being explored in all its nuances, not just dharma. You will see dharma and adharma being explored in all its nuances, so that every one of us can become clear where we are following dharma and where we are not. In pursuit of artha and kama, we should be as dharmic as possible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramkumar and Dr. Marc Halpern. I think we've come almost to the end of our 1.5 hour session, and time has just flown by for all of us. It's been really nice, and we hope to document this, all your thoughts, and put it out in an article and share it. Arunima, would you please come in, and thank you.
Dr. Marc, Dr. Ramkumar, it was a truly insightful session. I hope that the audience also has a lot to take from it, be it just about Ayurveda as a discipline, as a practice, or a wellness system that we can all integrate in our daily lives in whatever way is possible. Thank you so much once again. And we will be coming with another series of travel of ideas on different topics. At Center for Soft Power Studies, we have about 14 verticals that we cover. This was on wellness and Ayurveda, and we will have more such talks coming. Please stay with us, join us for more sessions, and we look forward for your continued support. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste and good health to all.